In this video, we will show you how to replace your rear brakes, brake shoes, and brake drums on this Dodge Ram. These will be located behind your rear wheels. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. Safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle so we can start removing each of our 5 21mm lug nuts and then the wheel. A quick inspection of the lug nuts, replace as necessary. Now that we have the wheel out of the way, let's go ahead and start removing the brake drum from the area. Typically for this, you should be able to take hold of it, give it a little wiggle side to side, and pull it out and away. Once you have that removed, a quick inspection and we'll set this aside. With the rear brake drum out of the way, have a quick peek at your rear brake hardware, confirming it's still in good reusable condition. If it looks like it's rusted or rotted, go ahead and replace it with a brand new set. Now we can start removing the rear brake shoes and the hardware from the area. Let's start up along the top here. Now to remove this, you can use a small prying device and carefully make your way under here. I'm using a brake spring removal tool. As you remove these, be extremely careful. They are obviously under spring pressure. Continuing on, we're just going to pull that out of place. A quick inspection and we'll set it aside. Now let's move down to the forward mounting point. In this area, you're going to find a circular clip holding a pin and a spring in place. We're going to use our specialty tool for this. What we need to do is press in on this and turn it either clockwise or counterclockwise, just enough that it comes loose from the pin. While pressing on this, I'm reaching along the back side. You're going to find the back end of that pin. It should go through the backing plate. We just need to get it to separate. Continuing from here, I'll just gently start turning this, carefully starting to release that tension. There we are. You want to be careful with this. It is under spring pressure. Now, if you were looking in the center of that circular clip, you're going to find that it has a rectangular slot. If you were looking at the very tip of the mounting pin that makes its way through that backing plate and the shoe, you can see that it has an ear that's pretty much flat, like a flathead screwdriver. Essentially, that should fit right into that slot on the locking clip itself, and we essentially turned it so it aligned and then it separated. A quick inspection of that hardware. As you can tell, this is going to be replaced. Now we can start removing the forward brake shoe. Up along the top, you can see that it slides over this area of the wheel cylinder. It also goes over this crossbar, which has a spring. As we start bringing this down, we'll be paying attention along the bottom. This is where the adjuster is located, and there's also another spring in this area. Now down in this area, you can see I'm stretching the lower spring. We want to try to carefully stretch that enough that we can pull the adjuster away from the shoe. Just twist it, slide it right on out of there. Now we can remove the spring from the shoe. There's our forward rear brake shoe. Go ahead and set that aside. Now down in this area, we have our adjuster and we have that lower spring. You can remove whichever one you want first. The spring on this one's pretty much ready to come out, so I'll just go ahead and take hold of that. I'm going to remove this from the rearward shoe. Inspection of that, set it aside. Now we can take hold of that adjuster. We'll have to bring this over to clean it. There is still one more piece on this adjuster that needs to be removed from the rearward shoe. It's typically stuck right in place along the bottom. For this, I'm just going to tap it out of place. There's that. Put these together temporarily. Like I said, we will clean these and re-lubricate them. Let's go ahead and set it aside temporarily. Now we can make our way up to the crossbar, which is located just underneath the wheel cylinder. Take hold of that, we'll slide it out of place. You can remove the spring from this. A quick inspection to make sure this is not rotted or damaged. A little bit of rust is okay. We'll set this aside. Now just on the rearward side of that rear wheel cylinder, we're going to remove this spring. Using my brake spring removal tool once again. Just make my way right in between here. Carefully separate this. Continuing from there, we're going to make our way down along the backside here. We're going to grab onto the adjustment lever. For this, I want to try to squeeze it towards the shoe, and you're going to find that it creates slack on this rod up along the top here, so we can pull this out of place. Quick inspection of that, once again, confirming it's not rotted or damaged. Up along the top, we can remove this. Quick inspection, set that aside. We have another spring down in this area. For this one, I'm just going to pry it out of place. Starting down along the bottom area along the shoe, and pull that off of there. Now we can slide this off of here as well. Now it's time for our rearward shoe anchor point. You know what to do. We have our circular clip. We'll go ahead and turn that, aligning it with the pin and removing the spring with the clip. Holding along the back side of the backing plate on that pin. Just going to try to work it around a little bit. There is some rust on this one. Now for these, if you find that your tool just slips on it and it won't grip, you could use some long nose pliers if necessary. Slide that pin out through the back side there. Now we can start removing this from the rear shoe. Typically for it, it's held in place with this clip, which is located behind where that spring would have been. For that, if it's stuck in place, just go ahead and pry it out of there. We'll have to remove that from this lever. We'll set it aside temporarily. Now we can start removing the shoe. Up along the top area of the shoe, you can see the emergency brake lever making its way through this upper port. Just go ahead and pull it right out of there. And there's the rearward shoe. Now it's time to do some cleaning and some inspecting. We'll start up at the wheel cylinder. Along each side of the wheel cylinder, you'll find that you have an adapter that's supposed to attach to the shoes. These metal adapters are removable. For each of those, we're just going to take hold of them, give them a little twist, and carefully remove them. You want to make sure you clean up the entire shafted area. Once we have one out of there, we'll just repeat the process on the other side. Quick twist, slide it out of place. After each one of those are out of there, confirm that there's no brake fluid making its way out of the wheel cylinder on either side. If there is, there's a seal that's gone bad on the inside of the wheel cylinder, and the entire wheel cylinder needs to be replaced. Now's the time to do it. This one looks fine. Let's go ahead and clean these up and move along. Now that I've cleaned both of my adapters, we'll continue on to cleaning up the mounting point where our brand new shoes will sit. I'm going to use a wire brush for this. We'll start up along the top, make our way down along each side. When cleaning along the backing plate itself, it's important to make sure that you clean along inside of the groove and on the outside of this groove here. When you install your brake drum, if there's any raised areas, it might hit and you might find that you have brake noise while driving down the road. Now, once you're done cleaning up the backing plate, we're going to pay attention down along the bottom area here. You should find two raised ridges that protrude outward towards where those parking brake shoes would be. What we need to do is actually remove this rearward one. Typically for this is where the adjustment cog is going to be, and you'd want to make your adjustment for the rear shoes through this port. This one hasn't been removed yet, so we're going to use a hammer and punch, drive this right out of here, and then we'll continue on once it's removed. If you find that it can't be removed with a hammer and punch or chisel, you can use an air chisel as well. There we are. Just a quick inspection of that. Perfect. Now moving away from the backing plate, let's have a look at the parking brake lever. There's an important place that you need to pay special attention to, and that's essentially right along here. This is the area that's going to go directly up against that rearward shoe, so you want to make sure it's a smooth surface. Also, inside of this groove is extremely important to clean as well. Use a wire brush, some sandpaper, whatever you've got. Now let's move along to that crossbar. There's two areas to pay attention to, one on each side. I'm going to use a wire wheel for this. Crossbar is cleaned up. Continue on to your adjuster. Now for the adjuster, you should be able to remove the rearward cap. You want to make sure you clean the inside of this and also the groove that fits around the shoe. We'll set this aside. Continuing on, we want to make sure that we completely disassemble this, so I'm going to turn this. Once it is completely unscrewed, we're going to clean up the threads and inside the port of the threaded area on this area as well. We also have the groove that fits into the shoe. For this, it's easiest to do with a wire brush or a wire wheel. I have a wire wheel, that's what I'm going to use. Now that I have that thoroughly cleaned up, let's go ahead and take hold of the adjuster portion, which has the smooth area right up along the tip here and the threaded portion. We're going to use some copper anti-seize directly along this area first. Just apply a tiny amount there, you don't need very much. Continuing on, we have that cap. That's just going to go right on there. Go ahead and spin it around, working in that lubricant. Now continuing on, we're going to apply a thin coating on the threaded area here. We'll continue on by screwing this all the way down until it's completely bottomed out. Go ahead and set that aside. Now let's move along to cleaning this lever. We have the small adapter that we have to remove first. Let's go ahead and grab onto that. Quick inspection, we'll set that aside. Now when you clean this, the main area that you need to pay attention to is right along the back side. We have this raised area that'll hit directly up against your shoe, so you want to make sure it's a clean mating surface. Also, go ahead and clean inside that circular port. Now I've cleaned up the main areas here. Like I said, along the back side we have the raised area, the circular port, and I also did along each end here on that hooked portion. Now let's gain focus on that wheel cylinder again. We need to add some silicone paste inside of each of the two ports, one on each side of the wheel cylinder where the adapters will sit. Don't need very much here, just a tiny bit of lubricant. Now when installing the adapters, we want to pay attention to the far end. This is the area that the shoe will sit around. We want to make sure we have those slots facing up and down. If you have them side to side, the shoe's not going to sit in there properly. For these, it's very simple. You can just take them, align them, press them in towards that wheel cylinder. You don't want to push it in too far, because if you push in this way, it might push the rest of the wheel cylinder out, breaking the seal free and causing a leak. Put it right in there. Continuing with our lubrication, there's going to be 6 mounting points on the backing plate that you need to pay attention to. I've marked them in yellow because they're fairly difficult to see otherwise. There's 3 along the back side, and then there's 3 more along the forward side, which are essentially in the same exact areas. I'm just going to use some high temperature lubricant here. We'll lubricate all 6 of those mounting points. After lubricating that, let's pay attention to our emergency brake lever here. We're going to add some lubricant along this area, which will be along the back side of our rearward shoe. Now it's time to install our rear brake shoes. When you look at them, you're going to find in your kit, it came with 2 different shoes. If you are looking at the friction material itself, you'll find that the forward shoe has a considerably less amount of friction material. That would be the forward shoe, and the shoe that has the most amount of friction material will be the rearward shoe. Let's start with the rearward shoe. We'll be taking the emergency brake lever. We have the hooked area. That'll go through this upper groove up here. Now that we have that in place, let's focus on this. We're going to lubricate inside of this circular port and along the back side here. This will be resting directly up against that rearward shoe. Continuing on from there, we have our adapter. That's going to slide right through that circular port. Now, while holding that together, let's take one of our anchor pins and we're going to slide it through this circular port on the backing plate. You can rest that there. Take hold of the shoe. We're going to take the adapter and slide it straight through this area, all the way through along the back side of that shoe. Just make sure everything's still situated right. If it falls out of place, typically you can just slide it right back in. Now we're going to start swinging this up into position, bringing that anchor pin straight through that adapter in the center there. In your kit, you're going to find that you have two different size springs. We'll be using the shorter of the two, which is the yellow spring. Get this in position. While holding that on there, we have our circular locking ring. Now you can use your brake tool or you can use some long nose pliers. We're going to try to align the slot that's on this locking clip with the mounting pin on the back side there. Now, once you feel as though you have that in place, you need to take a very close look. We want to make sure that the tip of the pin is perpendicular to the slot on that locking clip, essentially forming an X, definitely not parallel in any way, in which case it could break free on you while you're driving down the road. Now let's move down to this area. We have to install our spring. We'll have the smaller area of the spring up along this area that protrudes down and out. Press that in there as far as possible. We'll just take hold of this, make sure it does function properly and it does not slide out of place. Let's make our way up to the upper mounting point. We have this metal plate. This will go right up in this area. Press that on there as far as possible. Now, continuing from here, we have this rod. The lower hooked area will go on to here. We're going to be tugging on this. That's going to create slack and we can bring it all the way up and over the upper anchor point. Let's continue on to the upper spring. For this spring, we're using the shorter of the two springs that come with your kit. That's going to go from this port here all the way up to this hooked area. Slide this in here. Rotate it around. Now we're going to stretch this up here. Be careful because it will be under spring pressure. I'm using my brake spring tool. You can also use a small prying device. Just be extremely careful for any pinch points. Double check, make sure everything's completely seated properly. Now it's time for the upper rod here. Before you install this, let's take the spring and slide it into place. That goes on the forward hooked area of this. Slides right on there. Now we'll be taking this, we're going to slide it all the way behind the rearward hub here into the grooves that are part of the rear brake shoe. Once you have that rested in position, we can continue on to the lower spring. Let's move along to the lower spring and the adjuster. As far as the lower spring, you want to make sure you have it in the proper orientation. We have this longer hooked area facing towards the rearward shoe. When we put this hook in, we want to come from the back side of the shoe outward. It's time for our adjuster. We've already cleaned and lubricated this. We'll be taking the adjuster cog. We'll have that over towards the rearward brake shoe. pull out on that. Now continuing from here, it's time for the forward shoe. The forward shoe has the least amount of brake pad material. Now for that forward shoe, we're going to have to carefully hold onto the adjuster, and we're going to take the rearward spring, slide it into the shoe. We'll have to stretch the forward shoe out and away so we can get the shoe into this groove on the adjuster itself. Be careful for any pinch points. Okay, let's start carefully stretching on this. There we are. Now we can start bringing that shoe up into place. We have our crossbar with the spring. It wants to fit directly inside that groove. You can see it right there. As you continue bringing it over, we're also paying attention to the adapter, which comes out of the front of that wheel cylinder. We'll have to get everything properly aligned here so we can swing it in. Once you feel as though you do have it properly aligned, continue on to your next anchor point. We have that pin that comes through that back side of the backing plate out towards us. Once that's slid through, you have your spring and that circular locking clip. Now when you do go to install this spring, you're going to find on one side of it you have a smaller hole. That smaller hole will go up against the rear brake shoe. Since this spring is a little bit longer, it might be a little bit more difficult to control. Just be extremely careful. We're holding the pin along the back side there. A close inspection in the port to confirm we're properly locked in. Before we continue on with the forward upper spring, let's continue at the center anchor point. We want to just press this all the way inboard. There we go. Now it's time for that forward upper spring. This is the longer of those two springs. Slide right in here. We're going to swing that all the way up and bring it over this anchor point. A couple quick taps in each direction, confirming everything's properly secured and can move freely. Double check each one of the springs. Lastly, down at the bottom here, we want to make sure that the adjuster is properly seated as well. Before we can install the brake drum, we want to make sure we have a clean mating surface on the axle hub. You can use a wire brush if necessary. After scrubbing it down, we'll just use some parts cleaner directly on this area. Of course, we do have our collection receptacle under this area. It's good habit to use some anti-seize on this area. Just work that around. The next thing that you would want to do would be to prepare to install your brake drum. But before we do so, I want to show you the adjustment point right here. Now to adjust this out, you can do that simply by using a small pry bar or even a flathead screwdriver. But if you did have to bring the shoes back in a little bit or de-adjust them, you're also going to have to use an angled pick of some sort. The angled pick will be coming through from the backside, and essentially we want to press directly up against this area, pushing it away from the adjuster. Once you have that pressed away, you should be able to turn that adjustment cog. Turning it one way, it's adjusting the shoes outward. That'll be pressing them against the brake drum. By turning it the other way, we'll be bringing them in, de-adjusting the shoes away from the brake drum. Before you install the brake drum, it's a good idea to clean down the mating surface and the braking surface. Let's use some parts cleaner on this. Let's install that brake drum. Now, continuing from here, it's time to make that adjustment. We've shown you how it works. Essentially, what we need to do is make our way along the backside, and we'll start adjusting the shoes outward towards the drum braking surface. What we want to feel is a tiny bit of resistance here. You definitely don't want to have too much pressure where you really have to lean into it. That'll cause friction and heat, and your brakes might lock up. But if you have them too far de-adjusted, when you step on your brake pedal, the brake pedal is going to feel spongy, and you might not have very good braking. Starting to get a little bit of drag here. There we are. At this point, I have minimal drag by hand here, and I can hear both of the shoes just barely touching up against the brake drum. Continue on to protecting this area with your small rubber plug. Slide this right in here. Typically, it's going to be a pretty tight fit. I have to push it in. We may have to push it in using our small pry bar. One last quick inspection in this area and we can reinstall our rear wheel. When installing your wheel, go ahead and get it in position. Start on all 5 of your 21mm lug nuts, we'll bottom them out, get the wheel safely on the ground, and we'll torque each of these to 115 foot-pounds. Torqued. Okay friend, we showed you how to install the passenger side rear brakes on your vehicle. Go over to the driver's side, repeat the process. After that, go into the passenger compartment, pump up your brake pedal till it's nice and firm, and take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.